The night it all began felt normal at first. I was tired, stressed, and desperate to unwind. After locking the bathroom door, I sighed in relief, finally alone. The hot water started running, and the familiar sound of it hitting the tiles usually calmed me, but not tonight. Tonight, something was different. As I peeled off my clothes, a strange tension filled the air, prickling at the back of my neck. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as paranoia. Maybe it was the stress from school, or maybe I was just overthinking. After all, nothing ever happens in a quiet house like ours. I turned toward the mirror, but the reflection staring back wasn't entirely mine. It was surrounded by a thickening layer of steam, distorting my image. I stepped into the shower, letting the warm water wash over me. Slowly, I began to relax. The weight of the day melted away, and for a moment everything felt fine. Until I noticed something. Through the fogged-up glass, I saw a shadow. At first, I froze. My mind tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. It's nothing. Probably a trick of the light. Or maybe my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My heart pounded harder with each passing second. I forced myself to look again. This time, I was sure I wasn't imagining things. There was someone on the other side of the door. I could barely breathe. The shadow didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, unmoving. My body tensed, but I didn't scream. I didn't want to alert whoever it was. Instead, I reached for the towel, wrapping it around myself as fast as I could. I wiped a small section of the mirror and glanced back, hoping, praying, that I was wrong. But I wasn't. It was Lucas. He wasn't in the room, but he was close enough. Too close. He stood just outside the door, watching. I didn't know how long he had been there, but the look in his eyes chilled me to the bone. As soon as he noticed me noticing him, he disappeared into the hallway like nothing happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run after him and demand answers. But something held me back: fear, confusion, disbelief. Had I imagined it? Could it really be what I thought? The questions swirled in my head, making it impossible to think clearly. I stayed there for what felt like forever, clutching my towel and staring at the empty doorway. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that look. The way he just stood there. Silent. Watching. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe he wasn't watching me, maybe he didn't even know I was in there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted and on edge. I could hear Lucas and my mom talking in the kitchen, their voices light and casual. My heart pounded as I entered the room, forcing a smile onto my face. "Good morning, Ellie," Lucas said, his tone friendly, almost too friendly. "You looked tired last night. Everything okay?" His words made my stomach twist into knots. Was he trying to send me a message? Or was it just a coincidence? Either way, I didn't trust him. I forced myself to nod, pretending I wasn't on the verge of a breakdown. For the rest of the day, I watched him. Every move he made, every glance he gave me, I noticed it all. He didn't act any differently, didn't give me any reason to call him out. But that only made things worse. I couldn't prove anything, and without proof, I couldn't do anything. But I wasn't going to let this go. I needed to know if what I saw was real, or if I was losing my mind. That night, after everyone went to bed, I made a plan. I dug through my drawers until I found what I was looking for, a small camera I had bought a while ago. It wasn't high-tech, but it would do the job. I set it up in the bathroom, carefully hiding it so no one would notice. I knew it was risky, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to know if Lucas would try to watch me again. The first night passed without incident. I reviewed the footage the next morning, and there was nothing, just me, taking a normal shower. Part of me felt relieved, but another part of me was frustrated. Had I been wrong? Was I overreacting? But on the second night, everything changed. I waited until the house was quiet, then slipped into the bathroom. I acted normal, like nothing was wrong, but my heart raced as I turned on the shower. The sound of the water filled the room, masking the tension in the air. I stood there, waiting to see if he would come back. And he did. I didn't see him, but the camera did. When I reviewed the footage later, my heart nearly stopped. Lucas had been there, standing just outside the door, watching me. The look on his face was cold, calculating. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He knew exactly what he was doing. I wanted to throw up. I felt violated, terrified, and furious all at once. But I couldn't let my emotions take over. I needed to stay calm. I needed to figure out what to do next. Telling my mom wasn't an option, not yet. I knew she wouldn't believe me without proof, and even if she did, what if Lucas denied everything? What if he managed to turn her against me? No, I needed more. I needed something undeniable. So I waited. I kept the camera running, hoping to catch him again. But as the days went by, he didn't come back. He acted normal, like nothing had happened. I started to doubt myself again, wondering if maybe it had all been a fluke. Maybe he had realized I was onto him and decided to back off. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it. The tension in the air, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, it was still there. And I knew that sooner or later, he would try again. I just had to be ready. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every second of what had happened. Lucas's presence lingered like a shadow in my head, haunting me with unanswered questions. How long had he been watching me? Why was he doing it? And more importantly, would he do it again? Morning came too quickly, and with it, an overwhelming sense of dread. I forced myself out of bed, my heart pounding as I walked into the kitchen. Lucas was already there, casually chatting with my mom over breakfast. He looked so normal, like nothing had happened. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the knot of anxiety in my throat, and sat down. "Good morning, Ellie," he greeted me, his voice calm and friendly, too friendly. "You looked tired last night. Everything okay?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. Was he testing me? Mocking me? Or was this his way of letting me know that he had seen too much, that he knew I had caught him? I tried to keep my expression neutral, forcing a polite smile, but inside, I was shaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream at him, but I knew I couldn't, not yet. I needed to stay calm, to act normal. As the day went on, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Lucas's glances lingered a little too long. He seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever I thought I was alone. Whether it was in the hallway, the living room, or even the backyard, he was always there. Watching. Waiting. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but my fear was making me paranoid. But the more it happened, the more I realized it wasn't just in my head. He was following me, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. The tension in the house became suffocating, every moment spent around him a silent battle. I knew I couldn't live like this. I needed to do something. But what? If I confronted him, he'd deny everything. And if I told my mom, what would she do? Would she even believe me? Lucas had always been the perfect stepfather in her eyes, the man who could do no wrong. Without concrete proof, I was on my own. That's when I decided I had to catch him in the act. Again. The small camera I had hidden in the bathroom before was still in place. All I needed was for Lucas to make his move. I just had to wait. That night, I felt the same tension as before, a sense of impending dread that wouldn't leave me alone. I went through my routine as usual, but every second felt like an eternity. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see his shadow again. But nothing happened. The night passed in silence. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing. Lucas hadn't come near the bathroom. I felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. Maybe he had realized I was onto him. Maybe he wouldn't try again. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. He was too careful, too calculating. He was waiting for what I didn't know. Days turned into a week. Every moment I spent in that house felt like walking on thin ice. Lucas continued to act normal, but I wasn't fooled. I could feel his eyes on me, even when I couldn't see him. The web he had spun around me was tightening, suffocating me little by little. I had to do something before it was too late. One evening, I decided to take a risk. I waited until my mom went to bed, then confronted Lucas in the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, but I forced myself to speak. "Why were you outside the bathroom that night?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. Lucas didn't react right away. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that made my skin crawl. "Ellie, you must be mistaken," he said calmly, too calmly. "I was checking for a leak. Nothing more." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling inside me. "Don't lie to me. I know what I saw." His smile faded, replaced by something darker, something dangerous. "Be careful, Ellie. Accusations like that can get you into trouble. You wouldn't want to upset your mother, would you?" His words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. He was letting me know that he had the upper hand, that he could ruin everything if I wasn't careful. I bit my lip, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't let him see how scared I was. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my mind racing. Lucas had made one thing clear: this wasn't a game I could win easily. He was smart, manipulative, and dangerous. If I wanted to beat him, I had to be smarter. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. Lucas wasn't just watching me, he was testing me, pushing me to see how far he could go before I broke. And if I didn't act soon, he would win. I couldn't let that happen. Determined to uncover the truth, I knew I couldn't rely on instinct or fear alone anymore. I needed evidence. Something undeniable. Something that would leave Lucas no room to twist the narrative or deny what he was doing. That's when the idea struck me: I had to catch him in the act. Again. But this time, I would have proof. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I snuck into the bathroom. In my hands was a small camera, discreet, easy to hide, and, more importantly, my only hope of exposing him. My hands trembled as I positioned it behind a stack of toiletries, angling it perfectly so that it would capture the door and the mirror without being obvious. I knew it was risky. If Lucas ever found out, things could get a whole lot worse. But I didn't care anymore. I couldn't live in fear, constantly wondering when he'd show up again. The first night passed in agonizing silence. Nothing happened. I went through my usual routine, showering while trying not to glance at the camera. Every creak of the floorboards outside made my heart skip a beat, but when I checked the footage the next morning, it was clear Lucas hadn't been near the bathroom all night. Relief and doubt warred inside me. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe he really wasn't watching me anymore. Or maybe, just maybe, he had realized I was suspicious and decided to back off. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, but deep down, I knew better. Lucas wasn't the type to give up easily. He was waiting. Watching. Planning. On the second night, my worst fears came true. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard it, the faintest sound of footsteps outside the bathroom door. My heart raced as I forced myself to act normal, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. Wrapping myself in a towel, I quickly wiped the steam from the mirror and glanced at the door. For a moment, everything was silent, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing. But then, through the tiny gap beneath the door, I saw it, a shadow. Lucas was there. Again. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. Instead, I finished up as quickly as possible, my mind spinning with a mix of fear, rage, and determination. As soon as I was back in my room, I locked the door and grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I retrieved the footage from the camera, my heart pounding louder with every second. And there it was. Clear as day. Lucas had approached the bathroom door while I was inside. The footage showed him standing there for several minutes, his posture tense, his eyes locked on the door. He didn't knock, didn't say a word, he just stood there, listening, waiting. Then, as if sensing he was being watched, he quickly turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall. Watching the video made my stomach twist in knots. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. Lucas had been spying on me, and now I had proof. Cold, hard proof. But instead of feeling relief, I felt something far more overwhelming, fear. What if he found out about the camera? What if he retaliated? And worse, what if my mom didn't believe me? I sat on my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the footage. My initial impulse was to confront Lucas right away, to shove the video in his face and demand answers. But I knew that wouldn't work. Lucas was cunning, manipulative. He'd find a way to twist the situation, to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I needed a better plan, something that would leave him no way out. But before I could figure out my next move, there was a knock at my door. I froze. Ellie? It was Lucas. His voice was calm, too calm. Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something. My heart leapt into my throat. He knew. He had to know. Why else would he be here, now, in the middle of the night? I glanced at the phone in my hand, the video still playing on the screen. I had proof, but I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed more time. No, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm tired. We can talk tomorrow. There was a pause, long enough to make me doubt myself. Then, finally, he responded. All right. Good night, Ellie. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak in the floorboards made my heart race. I kept expecting him to come back, to try and force his way in. But he didn't. The house remained quiet, eerily so, until morning. When I finally emerged from my room, Lucas was already in the kitchen, smiling and chatting with my mom as if nothing had happened. I forced myself to join them, my stomach churning with unease. Lucas didn't acknowledge what had happened the night before, didn't even look at me for more than a second. But that only made me more suspicious. He was waiting for something, and I didn't want to find out what. That day, I made a decision. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed help, someone who would believe me, someone who could help me take Lucas down before things got worse. But who? My mom was out of the question. She was too close to Lucas, too blinded by his perfect facade. And I couldn't go to the police, not without risking Lucas finding out. There was only one person I could trust, my best friend, Sarah. She knew about my complicated relationship with Lucas, about how I had never fully trusted him. If anyone would believe me, it was her. I waited until school was over, then asked her to meet me at our usual spot, a small cafe near campus. As soon as we sat down, I showed her the footage. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. Ellie, she finally whispered. This is serious. You can't stay in that house. I know, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But I can't just leave. Not without making sure he's exposed for what he is. Sarah nodded, her expression hardening. Then we'll do it together. Whatever it takes, we'll make sure he can't hurt you or anyone else ever again. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. But deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The fear, the anxiety, it was suffocating me. Every second I spent in that house felt like a countdown to something worse, something I couldn't control. I had the proof, I had the courage. Now, I just needed to act. The next morning, I waited for the perfect moment. My mom left for work early, and soon it was just Lucas and me in the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked into the living room, where he was casually sipping his coffee, completely unaware of what was coming. "Lucas," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He looked up, surprised by my tone. "Why were you outside the bathroom last night?" For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Then he quickly masked it with a calm expression, setting down his cup as if nothing had happened. "You must be mistaken, Ellie," he said smoothly, that familiar calm tone returning. "I was just checking for a leak. Nothing more." I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to stay composed. His lie was so blatant, so shameless, it made my blood boil. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. "Stop lying," I snapped, my voice rising. "I have proof." That got his attention. His smug expression vanished, replaced by something darker, fear. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at me, calculating. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out his next move. "You don't understand," he began, but I cut him off. "No, you don't understand," I said, my voice firm. "I recorded everything. I have video proof of what you did, and if you don't stop, I'll show it to Mom. I'll show it to the police." His face paled. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, we heard footsteps. My mom had just walked in, her keys still in her hand. She looked at us, confusion and concern written all over her face. "What's going on here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Lucas and me. The tension in the room was palpable, so thick it was almost suffocating. My heart raced as I realized this was it. This was my chance to expose him once and for all. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Mom, there's something you need to see." Lucas shot me a warning glance, his eyes filled with silent threats, but I ignored him. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the video. I didn't want to do this, I didn't want to hurt my mom, but I had no choice. She needed to know the truth. As the video played, the room fell silent. My mom's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to something far more heartbreaking, betrayal. When the video ended, she turned to Lucas, her face pale and her eyes filled with anger. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling. "Is this true?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tried to reach for her hand, his voice desperate and pleading. "Honey, please, it's not what it looks like." I was just. "Don't," she interrupted, pulling away from him. Her voice was firm now, her eyes blazing with fury. "I don't want to hear it. Pack your things and get out of this house. Now." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but the look on my mom's face silenced him. Without another word, he turned and left the room, disappearing down the hallway. I stood there, frozen, watching as the man who had haunted my nightmares was finally forced out of our lives. When the front door slammed shut behind him, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. But as I turned to my mom, I saw something I hadn't expected: tears. She wasn't just angry, she was devastated. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but I couldn't stay silent." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, she pulled me into a tight hug, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Ellie," she said softly. "I just wish I had seen it sooner." In that moment, I realized something important. No matter how strong we try to be, sometimes we can't fight our battles alone. It took courage to speak up, but it also took love, my mom's love, Sarah's support, to finally break free from Lucas's twisted web. But even as relief settled over me, a lingering fear remained. Lucas was gone, but I knew it wasn't the end. Men like him don't just disappear. They come back when you least expect it. I didn't know when or how, but deep down, I knew I hadn't seen the last of him. I have something to show you, I said firmly, pulling out my phone. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. Lucas froze, and for a moment the calm, smug expression he always wore vanished. He turned pale as the video started playing. The room went silent. All we could hear was the faint sound of the video and the tension in the air. My mom stood still, eyes locked on the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. The expression on her face shifted: confusion, shock, disbelief. And then, fury. "Lucas," she began, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "Pack your things." "What?" Lucas finally spoke, his voice low, trying to sound composed, but I could hear the edge of panic. "Wait, honey, this isn't." "Pack your things," she repeated, cutting him off. Her tone was sharper now, leaving no room for argument. "You're leaving this house. Today." He took a step toward her, hands raised as if to calm her down. "It's not what it looks like." She's confused. "Ellie's been stressed lately, you know how." "Don't," she snapped, her voice rising. "Don't you dare blame her. I saw the video. I saw everything. Now get out before I call the police." For a brief moment, Lucas looked like he might fight back, like he might try to twist the situation one last time. But then he saw the look in my mom's eyes, and he knew. He knew he had lost. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the hallway. I stood frozen, my hands still gripping my phone. I couldn't believe it was actually happening. He was leaving. The man who had haunted my every thought, who had made me feel unsafe in my own home, was finally being forced out. But instead of relief, all I felt was emptiness. It didn't feel real. The sound of Lucas packing his things echoed through the house. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching as he grabbed his suitcase and headed for the front door. He paused for a moment, his hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at us. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw something cold, something calculating. "This isn't over," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. Then he opened the door and walked out, slamming it shut behind him. The sound of the door closing should have brought me relief. It should have made me feel safe. But it didn't. All I felt was fear. Because deep down, I knew he was right, this wasn't over. "Ellie," my mom's voice was soft now, almost trembling. She turned to me, her eyes filled with guilt and pain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't." "It's not your fault," I interrupted, my voice hoarse. "He fooled all of us." She reached out and pulled me into a hug. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Not completely, not yet, but enough to breathe again. We stood there for a while, holding on to each other, as if trying to convince ourselves that it was really over. But even as I stood there, a part of me couldn't relax. I kept thinking about Lucas's last words, about the look in his eyes as he walked out. He wasn't gone. Not really. People like him don't just disappear. They wait. They plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like him. Even though the house was quiet, my mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept replaying everything that had happened, every word he said, every glance he gave me. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still waiting for the right moment. "I know what you're thinking, it's over. He's gone. You're safe now." But that's the thing. When someone like Lucas invades your life, they leave a mark. Even when they're gone, their presence lingers. Their shadow follows you everywhere, reminding you of how close you came to losing everything. But I'm not afraid anymore. He may have left a mark, but he didn't break me. I faced him once, and if I have to, I'll do it again. Now, I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up, knowing how risky it was? Or would you have stayed silent, afraid no one would believe you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you think. And if you're wondering whether this is the end, well, maybe it is. Or maybe it's just the beginning of something I never expected. But for now, that's where this story ends.